Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Business Growth and Entrepreneur Podcast. I am Bill, the company's expert, and today we're going to be talking about incubators and accelerators. Are they good or bad? Are they useful or not so much? That's what we're going to talk about today. But first, I'd like to thank all my amazing viewers/listeners. You guys are awesome. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below this video. And if I can respond directly, I will. But if your comment is a little bit longer, if your question is a little bit longer, I may choose it to talk about on the podcast and give you a more in-depth answer. So let's dive in. Incubators or accelerators. So if you are the type of person that's thinking about starting a business, now you know who you are, but this is more on the entrepreneur side than the small business side. This is more of the startup versus small business type affair here. There may be an incubator or an accelerator in your hometown, depending on where you live. These things are sprinkled across most of the world, and they exist in some form in your region. Okay, at least you might be within the territory, shall we say, of an incubator or accelerator, and they are set up generally as resources for would-be startup founders. So if that's you and you're thinking of starting a startup type company, which usually is technology based, okay? We're not really talking about traditional businesses like starting a plumbing company. We're talking about doing a tech startup, okay? If that's you, you may have investigated whether it makes sense for you to join an incubator or accelerator. Now, let's maybe start by talking about the difference between those two organizations, okay? An incubator, that deals with people at the early stage, okay? Like you're just starting up. They want to encourage people to go into business for themselves and to do startup type business venture. And the purpose of this is usually to stimulate the local economy. Okay, it's to create wealth, preferably wealth that will remain in that particular region. And it's good for the government. It's good for the local economy. It's good for the startup founders. It's good for everybody. That's the thinking behind it. Okay, so those are incubators. And then from a technical sense, accelerators, they pick up the story from where incubators leave off. Once your business is established and it's on its way, it's going somewhere, then accelerators take over and they provide more resources, but they're more geared towards startups that are mid-trajectory. They're on their way. Usually they've taken some kind of startup capital investment, and they are in the growth phase, and they're either trying to get to the point where they're going to be revenue positive or getting towards the launch of a product, or even businesses that have less conventional business plans where their intention is to be acquired by a larger organization. They will assist with that. Okay, so you've got incubators to start businesses, and then you've got accelerators to grow those businesses, okay? Incubators and accelerators. And a lot of times in the real world, you get organizations calling themselves one thing, but really being another thing. So a lot of these associations and organizations call themselves accelerators, but really they're incubators. That's kind of the bottom line. Now, I have had some dealings with incubators, both incubators and accelerators in my time. I have been called in originally 15 years ago as a technical expert, as a resource to assist incubators and accelerators with various things. And then I was called in as a business expert a few years later. And then a few years after that, I ended up doing regular work as a mentor for startup founders and doing a lot of one-on-one coaching and coaching the founders of various companies or various startups for lengthy periods of time. So that's kind of my background of it. And it's interesting because I've seen different ways of running these types of organizations, and I have a few opinions on them because I've seen some stuff work really well and some stuff really work not so well. So If you're thinking of perhaps joining an incubator or an accelerator, let's go over a few things that may inform your decision and may potentially give you something to think about and to consider before you make a decision. Okay. So one aspect of this, and I've noticed this as a general trend in the last 10 years, and that is that the emphasis that some, or I would say most, at least most of the organizations that I've come into contact with, they encourage, it's a very extroverted type mentality. Okay, it's all about getting together, networking, sharing, doing group activities, staying connected, putting on events, things like this, stuff that requires very extroverted behavior. Okay, now don't get me wrong. I mean, people who are extroverted, which means that they enjoy dealing with other people, they enjoy social contact. There are some advantages in having that personality type, okay? Especially if you're trying to start or grow a business. It helps if you have a lot of personal relationships with all the players in your industry, whether those other players are customers, suppliers, vendors, government regulators, people that are running various resources like sources of grants and loans and the financial services, or sources of expertise or networks of angel investors, or even links to venture capital companies. So I mean, it really helps if you're an extroverted type person that enjoys going out and making those connections and forming those personal relationships. That can only help you, okay? So I certainly understand why that's being catered to, okay? But I've always found it ironic because traditionally, the types of people that would start a startup type company or startup type venture, the inventors, the technical people that come at this from a technological perspective, they tend to be introverts. They tend to be people that are into science and engineering and technology. They're people that think a lot about technical problems and have the ability to solve them. And generally speaking, those people tend to be introverts. So I found that it's a little bit of a culture clash when you have a lot of people coming from science and engineering that are wanting to start companies. They are the technical experts behind their particular startup venture. But the organization that's set up to help them is very extroverted by nature and wants them to socialize. It requires them to socialize and have lots of meetings and have lots of almost like classroom type activities and things like this. And I found it to be a total contradiction. In addition, not only does it end with the whole introvert extrovert thing, but you've also got more of a rebel versus conformist type conflict going on too. Because traditionally, the people who would want to start companies, in my experience, dealing with those people and having been someone who has done that myself, you tend to develop a rebel type attitude because by its very definition, you're the one that's going against the grain. Everybody else is doing the default thing, which is maybe getting a steady job, but the entrepreneur or the startup founder, by definition, they are going against the grain. They're saying, I don't want a regular job. I want to do my own thing. And in a lot of cases, those people don't seem to require, how can I put this? A lot of moral support. They don't need the unwavering approval of a glittering circle of friends to encourage them to go ahead with this plan. They have the conviction, they have the mentality to be able to just go off, do their own thing, be confident in their abilities, be optimistic in their outlook, and believe it can work. I mean, that takes a rebel attitude to a certain degree. And this is contrasted with, in my experience, the way that some incubators and accelerators have been run, especially incubators, which you get people running these organizations that may come from the government, they may come from the educational industry, and by definition, those are not rebels. Those are conformists. Those are people that do the default thing. Those are the people that have the rules given to them, and they follow rules. They are process-focused people, as opposed to results-focused people. And you get this total culture clash. And I've always been fascinated by this. My theory is that if these worlds could be bridged somehow and, catered more to the mentality of a lot of startup founders, I think the success rate of incubators and accelerators would go up. But that's just my opinion. It's my opinion based on what I've seen. Now, that brings us to sort of another point, which is that a lot of incubators, depending on what country you're in and, which region of the world you're in, a lot of incubators, not all of them, but a lot of them are run by the government, okay? And this makes sense because, after all, the goal is to encourage, is to stimulate the economy. It's to encourage economic growth, right? That is, after all, the end goal of encouraging a startup community and being able to give them resources and be able to nurture them and encourage them to be a success, right? At the end of the day, it is good for the economy. So it makes sense that a lot of these are run by the government because the government has many different initiatives, and one of them is promoting the economy. They have many different departments that do that, and this is one of those departments, okay? However, unfortunately, it tends to be a complete conflict in attitude because I can't think of a industry or a mentality that's the furthest from the mentality and personality of a tech startup than the government. They seem to be diametric polar opposites. And as a result, this culture clash, I feel, tends to get in the way. It's certainly what I've seen. So if you are a startup founder, or you are someone who isn't doing this right now, but you have ambitions to perhaps start your own company in the future, this is definitely a consideration. What I've seen is that a lot of the programs, they tend to, first of all, make you conform to a personality that you're not. And for example, startup founders generally, in my experience, don't want to go to class, nor do they want team-based activities necessarily, or group-based activities. They tend to be introverts. They tend to see through little exercises, and they don't need morale boosting or character building type events that they need to go to. Instead, they want much more concrete resources and concrete help. So this is a big conflict. And the second part of this is that in my experience, if the incubator is set up to be a resource that can advise startups, so potential startup founders join an incubator with the goal of being able to come up with a business idea, launch the business idea, and start making it happen. The problem is, I found in my experience that people from government, unfortunately, tend to be the most ill-equipped of all people to be able to answer some of those questions for startup founders. Being a former CEO and having just having a master's degree in business and things. I mean, a startup is the most pure exercise in business. It's where one person potentially is fulfilling all aspects of a business. They are the marketing person. They're the salesperson. They are the finance person. They are the operations person. They are the HR person. This is like an exercise in pure business. And you're trying to make it in the private sector. And the last person in the world that'll be able to help you with that and give you insight into it is someone who has never been in the private sector, someone who is a processed, focused government employee. And I'm not putting them down. I'm just pointing out that it's a polar opposite skill set. So consequently, what I've seen is a lot of startup founders join incubators expecting that the incubator will essentially take them by the hand and teach them what they need to know, give them access to all the resources they would ever need, and then success will follow. And unfortunately, in my experience, that usually doesn't happen. And that's one of the reasons for it. It's the being able to try and run startups like it's a department of the government, in my experience, does not lead to great things. Now, where I happen to be in the world, I'm in a figurative sense, I'm probably the furthest away from Silicon Valley that you could probably get. I am in central Canada, and unfortunately, the amount of investment in this particular region in tech startups, for example, is among the lowest it is of any region in the North American continent, that's for sure. So that presents some unique challenges. And I find that, for some reason, both startup founders and the incubators and accelerators, but more so for the incubators, they seem to be obsessed with money. They seem to be obsessed with getting grants and loans, and to the point where it becomes a problem. It seems to be the sole focus of a lot of these organizations is to assist with a startup or a startup founder or a would-be entrepreneur getting funding, okay? And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to take the form of let's connect with private investors and do it that way. Like high net worth individuals or, groups of angel investors. It tends to not take that form, certainly where I've had experience. Instead, it tends to be having somebody from the government help you navigate the world of financial services and government programs in order to obtain capital. And obtaining capital seems to be the number one obsessive focus of a lot of these companies. And what I've seen is that they spend so much of their energy and time dealing with obtaining capital that precious little is left over to actually focus on building a business, building a company. So this has been something I've seen that I kind of shake my head at and think like, man, I don't think that's right. And on top of that, I don't know how I would describe this. It's almost like a very questionable relationship between the incubators, and I'm not painting every incubator with this brush, but certainly some of the ones I've worked with. They seem to place undue importance on financing, and then they seem to have, in my opinion, a bit too cozy of a relationship with the financial services industry, up to the point where I suspect that it is a conflict of interest. Because a lot of what I've seen for the resources from financial services is that they will give an entrepreneur a loan. Now, on the one hand, a lot of entrepreneurs are encouraged to incorporate, okay? And one of the benefits of incorporating is that in theory, it separates your personal responsibility from your business responsibility. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to financing, despite all the supposed resources that are available, for the vast majority of young startups, the only financing that's really available, apart from the occasional government grant, is a loan that is secured by a personal guarantee. So what this means is that if you have started your own company and you have incorporated the company, for you to receive a loan, a business loan from a financial institution, like one of the major banks, it's still going to require you signing a personal guarantee saying that, even if the business fails, despite the fact that it's incorporated, I am still personally responsible for paying back this money. Okay, you are personally responsible for the loan. So, in my opinion, this is not really a resource. You know what I'm saying? It's certainly not a resource that you need some supposed expert at the government to be able to obtain from you. You could go to any financial institution, and if you have a house or a car or anything like that, you could obtain a loan secured against those assets, and you don't need anyone to be an intermediary for you or to open doors for you. You don't need anyone's help to do that. But effectively, that's the financial aid that they open doors for you to enable. And I think this is a total conflict of interest, because what I've seen personally a lot of startup founders who are taking their first crack at starting a business. This is their first attempt in their lives. Okay, they might be in their early 20s and they want to start a company, and it's a very noble cause. I applaud them for doing it. I think that they're very brave for doing it. And in my view, they're at the beginning of a journey that might take possibly 20 years. But when it's over, you are a master of business. You have taken control over your destiny. You have made your personal fortune, and you have the formula. You have the secret of being able to make money. You don't have to answer to anyone in the sense that you don't work at a conventional job and you don't have a boss. And you can prosper from this. You also have the potential, I suppose, to change the world or to make some impact upon it. From a technological point of view, that's an incredible ambition. But the problem is that you can't usually hit a hole in one. It works out that the very first thing you try isn't a smash hit. It isn't an instant success. And as a result, the road to learning the skills you need to be able to pull this off, it requires several failures and several iterations, several attempts to do it, all the while learning more and more as you take each step. The problem is that if the very first thing you try, you essentially have to sign your life away, as it were, obtaining financing to the point where you've now landed yourself in so much personal debt that you don't have the option of trying again and again and again. You have to go and get a conventional job at something much less risky and pay the bills, right? It's almost like taking out a student loan for $150,000. And then when your first attempt fails, you're stuck with that and you can't try again. It's just impractical. And this is the tragedy. This is the terrible tragedy. And what I've seen is that incubators are the ones that lead startup founders to that situation. The one thing that everybody is interested in, the bait that pulls founders into an incubator, is the thought of getting money. And once they get the money, the form in which it comes turns out to be the thing that results in their failure. So that's something that I've seen many times, and I really feel it's not the right way of doing things. So for that reason, although incubators and accelerators, but mostly incubators, they can offer a lot of resources. They can connect you with networks of experts, or at least people that have experience in your industry. Even though you could technically have found these yourself, they will facilitate connecting you with those. They do, in my opinion, drop the ball when it comes to offering things like loans that pretty much universally require a personal guarantee. And I find it a conflict, because it seems to me that a lot of financial institutions are just looking at startup founders as a meal ticket. I can sell my financial products, my loans, to these people and have them in debt to my bank. And that's my only interest. I'm not actually interested in stimulating the economy. I'm not actually interested in helping these people. I'm just here to sell a loan. And that's what I've seen. So I find it to be a little bit of a conspiracy of financial services in cahoots with government-run incubators. I have seen that. I'm not painting every incubator with the same brush. I'm just saying that I have seen this. And if you are thinking of joining an incubator, just be aware of this, okay? Don't get stars in your eyes and think like, oh, I can get $100,000, of financing to fund my business. Because unfortunately, what a lot of startup founders do when they obtain this kind of money, they rent office space, they design websites, they print business cards, they hire lawyers, they hire accountants, they hire patent experts, they file patents, and then promptly go bankrupt. Their business dissolves, and then they have to pay back the money. So don't fall into that trap. Instead, in my opinion, take advantage of some of these resources. Join an incubator if you wish. But remember this, business is about creating wealth, okay? In order to create wealth, you need to understand marketing. That's an essential part of it. Certainly not the whole story, but it is a part of it. And if you are a technical type startup founder, and you may have designed a way in your basement, you might have designed a way of building a better mousetrap, that's great and everything. But until you can sell that mousetrap, then it's very risky to be taking out financing, especially if this is the first time you're doing it. Everybody thinks all I have to do is build it and they will come. Unfortunately, that is false, especially in the world of startups. You have to build it and then sell it and they will come. And at that point, you don't need financing. That's the irony of it. It's paying for itself. If you get to the point where you're revenue positive, it's only a hop, skip, and a jump away from that to be able to be turning a profit. And at that point, the need for these kinds of financing sources really goes by the wayside. So I would focus on that. A lot of times people think they need a lot of money and they actually don't. Money is the excuse for not having to think. Often, if you don't have the money, but you can think, you tend to find ways of succeeding without needing a lot of money. And that's the type of thinking that I think a lot of entrepreneurs should do. So, in conclusion, good or bad, useful or not, incubators and accelerators. Well, I think they are definitely useful to a point. However, would-be entrepreneurs and startup founders, beware. Do not fall for these types of traps with promises of startup capital and funding that comes from financial services and loans that are simply secured against your personal assets or that make you sign a personal guarantee for repayment. Okay, those are a recipe for disaster, in my opinion. And if they can connect you with experts and people in the industry that you're looking for, that can help. Although you might want to see if you can access those on your own. And if you need to learn business, if that's the missing piece of the puzzle, depending on what programs the incubator offers, it might make sense, but you can also learn this stuff pretty cheaply through other sources. So that's what I would recommend. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. If you had any experience with incubators or accelerators, if you are a startup founder or you're just thinking about starting a business, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on this, if you agree or disagree, and what are some of the solutions. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for listening this long. You are awesome, and I will see you on the next episode. Take care.